Great. I very much appreciate being invited to come here again. And also, I appreciate being on Sunday morning, allowing me to get over my jet lag and do a little bit of extra preparation. So there's the title of my talk. And there's a lot of forms of cryopreservation. There's a lot of forms of injury, unfortunately, associated with cryopreservation. And so we'll just go down the list. Chilling injury is at the top, and it's just injury results from cooling. Doesn't have anything to do with freezing. And it seems like there's many forms of chilling injury. That when you have grease in a frying pan, it will solidify. It will go into a gel state well above freezing temperature. And a similar thing happens in cell membranes. It goes to a liquid to gel state between 0 and 20 degrees. It's not freezing injury, but it's still a solidification and change of state. And also free radicals can be a cause of some chilling injury. And actually a gene expression analysis showed chilling injury occurs with slow cooling right down to minus 80 degrees. And as I say, it's mostly stress and inflammation related genes that were expressed. So what can be done? Fruit fly embryos are very sensitive to chilling injury. And in 1992, Peter Mazur was able to vitrify fruit fly embryos by cooling at 20,000 degrees Celsius per minute. Peter Mazur, as I mentioned yesterday, is probably the person in the Society for Cryobiology who the other cryobiologists respect the very most in terms of his scientific knowledge, and he's very critical of cryonics. Anyway, this cooling at 20,000 degrees per minute is not feasible for cryonics or organ preservation. But 21st century medicine is able to minimize chilling injury using a hypertonic solution. So just to review, vitrification, we've spoken, you heard a lot about it yesterday. Just example with silicon dioxide can be in a crystalline state, quartz, or we can allow it to be in the state of glass, such as our drinking vessels and window panes and so forth. And vitrification is like a cooled syrup that gets more and more viscous until it turns into a solid state, like glass blowing. And vitrification doesn't cause the mechanical damage that results from ice formation. And to avoid ice formation, we use cryoprotectants, antifreeze, like you use in your automobile, but more medical grade. And we reduce ice formation by means of hydrogen bonding and colligative action. You see a lot of the OH groups there, and these presumably interact with the H2O, and similar with the carbonyl group there. And the biggest achievements in vitrification so far have been vitrification of rabbit brain, shows no ice formation anywhere by electron micrograph, and hippocampal slices have been cooled to minus 130 degrees Celsius and rewarmed, showing 100% viability. And the greatest achievement to date has been rabbit kidneys vitrified and cooled to minus 135 and rewarmed, able to indefinitely sustain a rabbit as the sole functioning kidney. I'll come back to that later in the presentation. Back to vitrification. Vitrification, as we say, is amorphous. It's a classification. But there's two problems. Vitrified tissue can crack at cryogenic temperature, and also the cryoprotectants we need to vitrify can be toxic. So first, the cracking problem. A vitrified tissue will solidify. It becomes more and more syrupy and viscous to about minus 123, 124 with Alcor's M22 vitrification solution, or the Cryonics Institute's VM1 vitrification solution. So when it turns from a syrup into a solid, that's the glass transition temperature, TG. And, but when you're cooling slowly, it means the outside of the solid cools more quickly than the inside. And then when the outside cools more quickly, the outside will contract more than the inside. And that results in thermal stress, and it results in cracking. It has to do with the lack of uniformity of the cooling when you're doing external cooling of a vitrified object. And then cooling, once you've got the solid object and you try to cool down to liquid nitrogen temperature, minus 196, there's a lot of cracking and fracturing that it can occur. Now, if you can cool slowly enough, and if you got a small enough sample, you can avoid cracking. Dr. Brian Walk was able to cool a vitrified rabbit kidney, which only has a volume of 10 milliliters, from down to liquid nitrogen temperature over a period of 2 days without any cracking or fracturing. But a large sample could take years or decades to cool, a large sample like a human cryonics patient, to avoid cracking. And we really don't know how long it would take. Nobody's been able to make the effort to try to do it. And so intermediate temperature storage is one suggestion to avoid cracking. We cool to just below the glass transition temperature and try to hold at that intermediate temperature rather than going all the way down to liquid nitrogen temperature. Now, I said here to avoid both intermediate temperature storage, to try to eliminate both cracking and ice nuclei. So let's talk a bit about ice nuclei a second. If you have absolutely pure water, it will not freeze above minus 40 degrees Celsius, which seems very counterintuitive, but that's the way it is. Nucleating agents are required for ice to form. And the reason why we think ice, the freezing temperature is close to the melting temperature of 0 degrees Celsius is because there are plenty of nucleating agents all over the environment. Silver dioxide has a structure similar to ice, and that can be used as a nucleating agent. And that can seen rain clouds and cause nucleation at minus 5 degrees Celsius. There's no nucleation that occurs at minus 140 degrees, but you have to get down to minus 140 degrees to avoid nucleation altogether. And nucleation is the highest at glass transition temperature. And ice growth is highest at minus 70. So in graphical form, we see this is a typical scenario. If you've got a vitrified sample, say with M22 Alcor solution, you cool down, there's no problem here because there's no ice nuclei. And then you get down here, and the nuclei start forming at minus 100. The formation is highest at glass transition temperature, and then about minus 135 it ceases, and minus 140 you're safe. There's no more nuclei being formed. So 21st century medicine has been doing experiments by vitrifying whole pigs, which are maybe comparable in size to a human. And so they'll do slow cooling to minus 140, and they can avoid any fractures in the brain of the vitrified pigs. But a pig brain is smaller than a human brain, so I'm doubtful that a human brain could get down to minus 140. And body fracturing begins between minus 130 and minus 135. So can we avoid ice nuclei above minus 140? So there's actually still a controversy going on at 21st century medicine as to what the best intermediate temperature storage temperature should be, minus 130 or minus 140 or something in between. We want to avoid both cracking and the ice nuclei. So we're between a rock and a hard place, it seems like. And this is applicable both for storage of organs, which is what kidneys in particular, which is what 21st century medicine is trying to do, or of course what temperature we would store cryonics patients at. So if cryoprotectants were non-toxic, we could use them in plenty of quantity and there'd be no ice nuclei. But vitrification is a balancing act between using the minimum amount of cryoprotectant required to vitrify without and not get ice nuclei or ice without risking too much toxicity. So one possible solution to this conundrum is cold helium gas. A company called Aragos Biomedical is using cold helium gas to vitrify transplantable organs. The cold helium gas is pumped through the blood vessels. They eliminate the blood and they pump the cold helium gas through. And that gives you internal cooling instead of the external cooling that results in cracking. And they've actually succeeded in cooling a pig kidney, which is about the same size as a human kidney, to minus 185 degrees Celsius without cracking. And they believe that at 20 atmospheres pressure, if they had the kidney under pressure, they could cool 100 times faster than that. Now, fast cooling reduces the cryoprotectant exposure time, so allows enough time for ice nuclei to form. And also, you could actually use less worry about toxicity if you're able to cool faster. The slower your cooling time, the more toxicity can be a problem. I guess a big concern is will the cells in the blood lining the blood vessels be damaged by this process, and that remains to be seen whether we can rewarm the kidneys and have them actually be viable. I guess yesterday there was some gas embolism problem suggested, so there's no end to problems. And there's our graph again, and just as saying that if we can cool quickly, then we can. Anyway, if we can cool quickly through this whole zone, we don't get any ice nucleation. We can avoid the ice nucleation. There's another thing, another way. There's also the issue of warming. If we warm quickly, we can get through this region without ice growth. And actually, Dr. Brian Walker, 21st Century Medicine, has developed radiofrequency rewarming for kidneys. At 27.5 megahertz, he's able to rewarm at 200 degrees Celsius per minute at minus 70 degrees. So we can prevent the ice growth in kidneys, at least for kidneys, at 200 degrees Celsius, not necessarily for larger objects at this warming temperature. But it's possible new equipment could achieve 300 degrees Celsius per minute. But the higher warm rates risk hot spots. We don't want to burn the tissues, and there's a risk of burning tissues if you heat too quickly. Maybe future technologies, warming technologies, will overcome this. That remains to be seen. Just an aside, other things to worry about. It is better to be colder to avoid radiation damage. The acetylcholinesterase enzyme under X-ray radiation shows conformational changes irradiated at minus 118 degrees Celsius, but not minus 173. And insulin is subjected to X-ray radiation, so it's 4 times as much damage due to disulfide bonds when irradiated at minus 173 degrees Celsius compared to minus 223. And ions are many orders of magnitude more mobile than molecules. And we still have ions, even though we're in a solid cryogenic state. So we get greater molecular motion at minus 140 than minus 26. So what do we do? Store in helium, liquid helium, or in a moon crater? But how serious is this damage? I mean, we can experience damage every day, multiple forms of damage, which results in aging injury. It takes decades for us to age, so we're probably actually fairly tolerant to damage. And these This northern wood frog spends months in a semi-solid frozen state at this temperature and has full recovery when it's rewarmed. So now let's talk about ischemic damage. Ischemia is what you get when there's no blood flow, no oxygen or nutrient to the tissue, no waste removal, and body tissues are damaged, blood vessels become leaky. We've got warm ischemia, which is no immediate cooling when the heart stops of a cryonics patient, and cold ischemia, which is cryonics patients will spend 12 hours to 3 days or more in shipment in ice to a cryonics facility. And cryonics patients, cooling cryonics patients to ice water temperature, metabolism, all metabolism based on biochemical reactions, and that includes ischemic damage. Cooling can slow the ischemic damage. I got that twice. And it can slow chemical reactions, and that means slowing chemical reaction, ischemic damage. And the rule of thumb is that metabolic rate or chemical reactions are halved for every 10 degrees Celsius drop in temperature. So faster cooling is better. The faster cryonics patient can be cooled, the less ischemic damage. And cooling in an ice bath is faster than cooling with ice bags. And cooling with circulating water is better than just a simple ice bath. Ice bath, as opposed to ice cubes, water conducts heat away from the body much quicker than ice cubes do. And if you circulate the water, it results in either faster cooling of the patient. So this is Alcor data that shows you 4 hours of cooling, how much cooling you can get with just ice bags, and how much faster the cooling is if you use an ice bath, and even faster if you have a circulating water in the ice bath as a result of a squid. But we can get even faster cooling than that by cooling through the blood vessels. We get inside, and we're not doing external cooling anymore. We're cooling inside the blood vessels, and we use a cold fluid, and this requires surgical access, which takes time and requires a standby surgeon. Well, there's a new method called liquid ventilation, where you pump a cold fluid into the lungs, perfluorocarbon in particular, and that's much faster, gives you much faster cooling. So spin animation, this shows you experiments. This is where they've got a surgeon, they're working on pigs, doing cryonics trainings with pigs, and that have been pronounced dead, and they got the surgical access. So this is what you get in 30 to 40 minutes with surgical access. With liquid ventilation, you get just really rapid cooling, and it starts right away. You don't need a surgeon to be accessing the blood vessels. So as I say, you can eliminate the need for some expensive surgeon standing by waiting to access the blood vessels. But unfortunately, the liquid ventilation equipment that we've had so far has been fragile, and every time they've tried to airship it in a cryonics case, it gets busted by rough handling in the airports. And so they've hired engineers to try to make this equipment more rugged and withstand the rough handling. Now, perfusion after cold ischemia. As I mentioned, the cryonics patients often spend 24 to 48 hours or more in ice water, at ice water temperature during shipment to a cryonics facility. So all this time spent in ice water temperature leads to this extended cold ischemic damage. So when I was president of the Cryonics Institute, I had Ashwin and Shauna DeWolf of Advanced Neurobiosciences, A and B, try to find a perfusion solution that would be better than VM1, the CI's vitrification solution for cold ischemia. So they came up with a solution tentatively called VM2 that would increase perfusion and reduce ice formation after both 24 and 48 hours of cold ischemia. So I thought that was great. I was ready to use it on our CI patients, but Ashwin didn't want to, and I was under a lot of political pressure not to be experimenting with our patients. So Ashwin insisted on validating these results with electron microscopy, but the electron microscopy gave extremely contradictory results. It's like trying to watch a baseball game through a microscope. What you see, it depends on where you're looking. You could be looking at the pitcher's eyelashes or the catcher's shoelaces or the blades of grass or whatever. So electron microscopy was not a good tool for validating. So anyway, in 2014, CI is paying for further work by Ashwin and Shana to validate VM2. And they're going to use electron physiology results. As you may know, we have this long shipping time for people living outside of North America, cryonics patients, and all this cold ischemic damage. So the best thing to do really is to vitrify the patient overseas, locally, and then ship the patient in dry ice. Vitrification solution is actually fairly stable at dry ice temperature, at least over a shipping time of a few days. In January 2010, I shipped some VM1 to the UK, and Alcor has just approved remote vitrification in July 2014. CI's vitrification solution can be made anywhere. The formula is on CI's website. Cryonics UK obtained a chemist to make VM1. In May 2013, Sylvia Sinclair, the wife of British cryonicist Alan Sinclair, was perfused with VM1 by Cryonics UK, shipped in dry ice for CI for further cooling to liquid nitrogen temperature. So I mentioned before the greatest vitrification achievement to date has been a rabbit kidney vitrified and cooled to minus 135, rewarmed, able to sustain a rabbit as a sole functioning kidney. Now this result was published in 2009, but actually the experiment was performed in 2003, and it hasn't been replicated since 2003, and it was only one kidney, one rabbit. So, they actually, even though it supported the rabbit, the kidney function was poor. There was a lot of high levels of blood creatinine and so forth, and even though the rabbit was able to survive, it wasn't what you'd like. So where have we gotten in the last decade? Well, what was the problem? The 21st century medicine moved to a new building. That was a disruption which lasted up to a year. The manufacture of hydroxyethyl starch, which was an essential ingredient, stopped making the product. There were other HES brands available, but they didn't work. The rabbit surgeon they had at 21st century had left, and they had trouble finding a replacement surgeon. And the 21st century, part of moving into this new building was so that, because the funders of 21st century wanted them to work on a whole body vitrification, so they had to turn their energy to that. So all these delays have created a problem, but they've got an HES replacement now, and they've got a new rabbit surgeon. The biggest problem, it turned out, as far as the kidney damage, was the ice formation on rewarming of the inner medulla. Now, I mentioned Brian Wolk has developed radiofrequency rewarming, which will mitigate some of that damage. But part of the problem is the blood flow is very uneven in the kidney. About 90%, you got 90% blood flow is in the kidney cortex, 10% in the outer medulla, and only 1 to 2% in the inner medulla. So how do you perfuse the inner medulla without poisoning the cortex with cryoprotectant toxicity? Well, they've developed a new flow lock perfusion method, and the flow rate remains constant, and as pressure increases, as the viscosity and pressure increases. And the flow lock method is more sensitive and less damaging perfusion method than what they used previously. If you want to know more about the flow lock method, you can go to the Cryonics Society, the Society for Cryobiology website, and look at the 2013 annual meeting, and there's a video of a half-hour video of Greg Fay describing the flow lock method. And so it's expected that they'll be replicating kidney vitrification with improved results very soon, and hopefully be able to do human kidneys, which will be transformative. It will doing human kidneys will just wake the whole world up to the possibility of the technologies we've been trying to develop for our cryonics patients, of course, but also for organs, transplantable organs. So cryoprotectant toxicity, this could be the most serious technical problem in cryobiology and cryonics. As I mentioned, we're trying to maximize cryoprotectant concentration while minimizing the toxicity. Mixtures are less toxic than individual cryoprotectants, and more rapid cooling and warming allows for the use of higher concentrations. And there's our graph again. And this whole ice nucleation problem would go away. There'd be no ice growth, no ice nucleation if we could use plenty of cryoprotectants. So, and if we figured out how to make them more non-toxic cryoprotectants. But, you know, we don't, the mechanisms of cryoprotectant toxicity are not understood. There's some theories, but we don't really know. And understanding the causes, if we actually had an understanding what the mechanisms were, that might help us to develop less toxic cryoprotectants. So Dr. Gregory Fay and his colleagues at 21st Century Medicine have developed this QV star hypothesis to explain cryoprotectant toxicity. It's intended to measure the average hydrogen bonding strength of a cryoprotectant agent and water molecules in solution. And by this hypothesis, the more vitrifying capacity a cryoprotectant agent has, the more toxic that CPA will be. But I have doubts about QV star. As I mentioned, the cryoprotectants, the mechanism seems to be based on these hydrogen bonding groups that interfere with the hydrogen bonding that happens between water molecules that results in ice formation. So there's the formula. The Q part of QV star refers to moles of water divided by moles of polar groups in the cryoprotectants. V is the concentration needed to vitrify, and the star part refers to vitrification occurring under standard cooling rate. So the faster cooling assists vitrification. The standard cooling rate is 10 degrees per Celsius. And the way the assay for cell viability that's used is the potassium-sodium ratio. We've got a sodium pump in our cells that use ATP to pump sodium outside of the cells and potassium into the cells. So if you've got an intact membrane and your ATP supply is working, you should have a normal potassium-sodium ratio. So here's a plot. There's the sodium-potassium ratio plotted against QV star, and this is the line that we get that defines that is used as the indicator of the QV star hypothesis. And notice this point right here. This is DMSO, which seemingly defines, does a lot to define this line. Now, I guess you can say the line would be still defined without the DMSO point, but on the other hand, these points are all points selected. These are mixtures selected by Dr. Fay, and I'm not sure that they're representative. So I have some concerns. That's one of the DMSO point is one of my concerns, and the CPA composites. And also, what does he count as polar groups? This is what he counts the polar group. This S double, the sulfonyl group, the carbonyl group, the hydroxyl group, and the amide. They each count as one polar group, and they're all counted as being the same. They're all equated as being the same. And the hydrogen bonding strength of each of these groups is not the same, varies with temperature, concentration, and solution composition. The best textbook I can find on hydrogen bonding, and I haven't given up looking for these sources, but it doesn't even give exact numbers for the hydrogen bonding strength of each of these groups, and it just gives a range, and even a range for categories. But as I say, I'm going to keep researching this. And QV star does not explain why sugars such as sucrose can vitrify and yet aren't toxic. So there's sucrose, and that's got all these hydrogen OH groups, which can interfere with water. And sugars have been used as non-toxic cryoprotectants. It's actually sucrose in combination with ethylene glycol has been used to vitrify human oocytes. This was the first vitrification of human oocytes. Is using this formula. And northern wood frogs, as I mentioned earlier, are able to use intracellular cryoprotectant glucose, which is also a sugar, without toxic effects. And there's our northern wood frog again, using the glucose. So really, to understand cryoprotectant toxicity is necessary to know what macromolecules and organelles are being damaged, how they're being damaged. And if we had molecular analytic tools superior to those that are currently being used by cryobiologists anyway, maybe we could actually determine what cryoprotectants are causing what damage and so forth. I'm writing a review of cryoprotectant toxicity, which includes some of my concerns about QV star. I've had some dialogue with Greg Fay about this, that which will continue, and possibly Dr. DeGray's journal Rejuvenation Research can be a medium for publishing my essay. One more point, Dr. Fay is before Dr. Fay was saying that formamide, that the toxicity of DMSO was reduced by exactly in proportion to the heat of mixing of DMSO and these other cryoprotectants. The largest reduction of cryoprotectant toxicity was mixing formamide with DMSO, and to a lesser extent to ethylene glycol and propylene glycol. And now he's changed his view and says that it's actually the DMSO that's reducing the toxicity of formamide. And he's got a different explanation, which frankly, I've read it several times. I can't understand it, but I'll try to figure it out. So back to ischemia, we've got problems with cold ischemia, I described it. There's also warm ischemia. What about when the heart of a cryonics patient stops? And what if they're alone? Nobody notices that their heart has stopped. And this has been, as president of cryonics organizations, I was very concerned about it, especially about our elderly cryonics patients living alone, and with good reason, because some of them did die, and one of them, I would say, died on a Friday evening, wasn't discovered until the following Monday, and suffered a great deal of damage due to this all this cold, warm ischemia. So I've been looking at trying to have an alarm system that would deal with this problem. And actually in 2012, a good step towards that process happened when Mio Alpha developed this wristwatch device that shows pulse rate. And so I'm wearing one, and that shows my pulse rate at the moment. And gives a continuous heart rate monitoring, and when used when communicating with my smartphone, it can give the GPS, and uses Bluetooth power consumption. It's got a 35 battery life. When the battery gets too low, it reverts to watch function. Here's the cell phone that I would be have used in combination with this device. And there's a Canadian cryonicist who, when I was expressing my concern about this problem, developed an app. And I actually got this particular smartphone because it has an Android operating system. Unlike the Apple Android operating system, Android is open source. And so Dennis made an open source app to work with my smartphone and my Mio Alpha. And so when the heart rate stops, it cyclically dials phone numbers in sequence and leaves an SMS message. And so here's what his app looks like on my cell phone. And you've got 3 phone numbers you can put in. It dials these numbers in sequence. You've got a choice. You can set the lowest pulse rate. So actually, it could even save your life. It isn't necessarily that your heart stops. If your heart drops below 35 beats per minute, it could set off the alarm. And actually, medical professionals could get to you and save your life. Dennis is, by the way, making this available free. So and maybe as a toy. So hopefully the FDA would not get involved. Anyway, and he's got a higher pulse rate and also a countdown before dialing, so you can be warned if it's about to dial your people, and a time between dialing events. You can change all these settings. So anyway, and this is the SMS that you see. Because the Android phone has GPS, it sends the GPS location, and I blotted out the phone number to call just for personal privacy reasons. But I could have put any phone number in there. But anyway, that's what you see. So I've got more details on the personal alarms on my website in the Cryonics section, the personal alarms page. Should look at the 2014 update for the latest. I just want to mention there's a new organization called Oregon Cryonics, which is run by Jordan Sparks, who's a very successful dentist who has about 50 employees. He's got a dental software business. And he's actually started, aside from his 50 employees in the dental software business, Jordan Sparks was formerly a CI director. He's got 3 full-time employees working on cryonics. Matthew Sullivan used to be a suspended animation employee. Luke Parrish and Matthew Deutsch is a very young cryonicist. And they only store brains or heads. As I say, they're trying to create an affordable option. They charge to cryopreserve a head, $25,000, just a brain, $14,000 to chemically preserve a brain, $2,500, and for a PET, $3,000 for the brain, and $600 to chemically preserve it. The first patient was May 6th of this year. Matthew Deutsch's dog's brain, cryopreserved liquid nitrogen. The surgery was by Shauna DeWolf, perfusion by Ashwin DeWolf, and perfused with M22. Now, I just want to talk a bit about nanotechnology because at the last 2010 symposium that I attended, I expressed skepticism whether nanotechnology could be done at cryogenic temperatures. And that was yesterday's presentation said that no, it had to be done at physiological temperatures, and I disagree with that. I've since, talking to Ralph Merkel, he persuaded me that yes, you can use nanotechnology at cryogenic temperature, and actually would be vastly superior. So I'll just give a brief overview, but all the technical details are were published in Cryonics magazine in July 2013, and that's available free online at the Alcor website. Anyway, this Arrhenius equation says chemical reaction rate declines exponentially with declining temperature, but that's a nanomachine is not a chemical reaction. It's temperature independent. It operates by mechanical movements of the constituent atoms. And and also the molecular structures being repaired will be more stable at cryogenic temperatures than they would be at physiological temperatures. And there's less of a problem with oxygen reactivity. So, the repair at cryogenic temperatures would be like a nano-mining and nano-archaeology. We'd have nanobots preserving, clearing blood vessels, and the blood vessels will become the mining shafts that go through the body. Once you just use conveyor belts and so forth to remove material from the blood vessels, and then these shafts. Then you need where there's freezing damage or ischemia, where the blood vessel's been destroyed, you'd have to use artificial shafts, and you'd have to be much more careful when you're digging in areas not in the blood vessels. And then you'd penetrate the shaft walls to repair tissues. So repair or replace, well, obviously we probably need mostly new organs, so we might as well just replace the heart, kidney, liver, all these other organs. And the only thing that really we need to repair rather than replace is the brain. And for the neural patients, we need to get a new body. Organelles, we can replace a lot of these organelles. We have to repair synapses. We want to have the same connections as was in the original, and the same neurotransmitters. And molecules replace proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, DNA. Well, anyway, and as far as rewarming is concerned, the cryoprotectant must be replaced. Perhaps, as I say, with the rapid rewarming methods, we wouldn't need to worry about nuclei formation or ice crystal growth. And repairs of aging and disease could be done at higher temperature, possibly, if that seems suitable, or at cryogenic temperature. And anyway, I think it would be best done at cryogenic temperature. So that's my presentation. Any questions?
Any questions? I have to thank you very, very much because of your presentation of this Mio Alpha watch. We talked about this, we had discussions about this technology, and some guys have been working on this, but this is the first time, from my point of view, that we have really working alarm system. We are working on this since, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, and now it's a reliable alarm system. And what I want to know is the failure rate. So how many false alarms are there, and what is the quality of the pulse? Is it a scientific quality, or what is the quality?
The pulse rate. You can see my pulse rate right now. I think it's reliable enough for our purposes. It's not perfect. I guess I meant to mention and did not mention that the system I have right now is I haven't got it working because I've got Bluetooth connection problems between this Android phone and my Mio Alpha. Now, Dennis Freethinker, who developed the app, is using a Nexus 5. And it works fine with him, so I'm going to bite the bullet and get a Nexus 5 instead of this flaky Android phone, which sometimes makes a Bluetooth connection and most of the time has been failing. But I mean, at times it's worked. When I showed it working at times, so it has worked in the past. I just don't know why the Bluetooth is so flaky. Other than that, Dennis says it works fine with his system. And I'm going to be giving a presentation at the Laughlin Conference in November, and I'm going to make sure I've got a working system before then.
So, in your opinion, what is the main thing that's preventing more detailed research into cryoprotectant toxicity? So if you had $100,000 right now, would you be able to contract someone who could start working on this right away?
Well, if I don't know about $100,000, probably I think Greg Fay mentioned $1 million. He'd like to hire a bunch of biochemists and so forth to work on the problem at 21st Century Medicine. As I say, it would be nice to have not just biochemists, but to actually, if there's some way of determining, to actually look at the macromolecules and see what damage is being done by these cryoprotectants, that might help solve the problem.
So, wait a second. I think you're next.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, as the other people said, a wonderful presentation. I have a very naive question, I'm sure, which is I thought the cold helium system was very cool, no pun intended, but I was a bit confused because you say it's faster for, it allows faster cooling and thus lower time exposure to cryoprotectant.
It isn't just faster cooling, but the cooling is internal to the organs, so you don't have the cracking problem by cooling from the outside in. You're cooling within the organ.
Okay, but here's my naive question. How do you put the cryoprotectant in? Because I think don't you put the cryoprotectant through the blood vessels? So if you put the cryoprotectant through the blood vessels and then you pump gas into it, doesn't that remove the cryoprotectant?
It removes the cryoprotectant from the blood vessels, but not from the tissues.
Okay, so you put the cryoprotectant, you wait for it to diffuse into the tissues, but that's presumably going to happen at a higher temperature, and then you pump in the gas. Is that how it works? Okay, thank you.
So I think Frank was next.
Thanks. You have a question to your point that there's always a balance act between toxicity and cooling quality. So when using higher concentration of cryoprotectiva, it would be much advantageous for ice formation and fractioning points of view. But I mean, the toxicity is mainly a problem, I think, at warm temperatures. So when warming up again, and we have to assume anyway that future technology will get rid of the toxicity. So could one also say we increase the concentration, have a good freezing quality with less ice formation and fractioning, and say the toxicity can be reduced or get rid of anyway in the future, so it doesn't matter if it's a bit more or less.
From a cryonics point of view, but 21st Century Medicine is working to preserve kidneys, and if they can achieve this kidney preservation, that'll be a massive breakthrough in terms of it'll just change the way the world perceives the work we're doing, and maybe even convince people that cryonics is feasible. And also, you know, if organ banking it becomes widespread, and also it could save many lives, a lot of, and not just kidneys but hearts and so forth. If we develop artificial hearts with stem cells or with pigs or so forth that we could use in humans, a lot of the deaths that we have now could be postponed substantially, maybe by a decade, just by having all these organs transplanted. So this is going to certainly arouse public attention and probably bring a lot of large companies with large investments into the field of doing the work that only, this 21st century medicine, a really small fraction of the world, science is working on. As far as removing the cryo, of course, when they do these kidney transplants, vitrify a kidney, they have to wash the cryoprotectant out when they're rewarming before they transplant the kidney back into the rabbit.
Thanks, Ben.
So maybe one question, yes?
If there's someone else.
That's fine.
Thanks. So I have. So you mentioned several examples of in hippocampus slices, the kidney experiment, which seem to suggest that vitrification then still tissues retain some feasibility and some live cells. But the question is, do you have any idea, if you were to rewarm a human body, would there be any live cells at all with the current state of technology? Or would all be dead in the current state of technology?
Well, I don't think, I wouldn't say they'd all be dead. As they say, well, I didn't say, but the brain is actually probably is less damaged than the kidney is. The kidney seems to be more easily damaged. You know, I explained the problem perfusing a kidney, the inner medulla and the outer medulla. The brain is very tolerant, and as I showed the experiment, discussed the experiment with the brain slices. Ashwin de Wolf, I don't know why he's not here. He's supposed to be presenting today, and he's the main man doing cryobiology work with brains, and he's using rat model, and he's not only using slices, but he's doing electrophysiology experiments on whole brains of rats, and that's how he's wanting to validate VM2 partially, is by showing that the restoration of electrophysiology, complete electrophysiology of the rat brain after perfusion.
Thanks a lot. Another question? Okay, Sebastian, there you go.
Ben, you said in passing that you think cryoprotectant toxicity might be the biggest challenge, and you've given us a list. If you had that $1 million, would that be where you would put your money, or where would you put your finger as to what's the biggest technical challenge to Cryonics?
Well, it does seem like, I guess putting your money there is based on the assumption that you're going to be able to solve the problem. So that's the big question mark. Certainly, if you could solve the problem, if you were convinced that with enough money you could solve the problem, that would be where the money would go.
So I want to also say that was a really great talk, thank you, and lots of updates that I hadn't heard before. About the work on at 21st Century on kidneys, I certainly agree that it would be a major change in people's attitudes if they could get it to work. But since they're not doing persiflation the way Aragos are, do you think that they're in range of solving the cracking problem well enough, as well as the toxicity problem?
I don't know. I think they probably are. I mean, well, the one rabbit kidney they did in 2003, they cooled down and warmed immediately. And mainly just for convenience, because the rabbit was still on the table and so forth, and it was just most convenient to transplant the kidney back into the rabbit while the rabbit was still there. So I guess the question would be, how long could you store the kidney? What intermediate temperature storage do you store it at? And as I say, it's still controversy at 21st Century.
My thinking is, like, for transplantation purposes,
yeah, you want to store.
If you want to get something across the world, how are you going to reliably keep it at your chosen temperature?
Yeah. Well, on the other hand, it's also a matter of a trade-off between time. How long. I mean, there's concern about if you're going to be storing for months or years or whatever. The ice nucleation problem might even at an intermediate temperature storage might be worrisome. But on the other hand, if you just need to preserve the kidney, I mean, normally I think transplantable kidneys only last I don't know, a day at the most. Whereas you want to be able to have them last a bit longer and send them across the world reliably and so forth. And so anyway, I can't really give a definitive answer, but I think they have a good chance of dealing with the problem adequately.